Good evening, anti-imperialist greetings to everybody who's joining us online and in person, so to speak, is within this Zoom. This is our 15th class at the Midwestern Marx Institute. Um, Previously, we had 7 classes under the title of Reform or Revolution, a Marxist view of revolutions past. We were slated on October 11th to have our 8th class, and we were going to look at the Black Panther Party for self-defense, the American Indian movement, the original true Rainbow Coalition in the United States on the verge of revolution in 1968. And October 7th happened, erupted, exploded on the historical scene. And at the Midwestern Marx Institute, we understood almost immediately that we had to pivot with all of our ideological, historical, and do I dare say spiritual energies in defense of Palestine, in defense of Palestinian nationhood, and the Palestinian right to merely exist at this point. So this is our 15th class in the Educate Against Genocide series. We've had dozens and dozens of new activists, organizers, friends, comrades, fellow travelers join us. It's great to see new faces tonight. We have a special guest speaker, someone who's been an incredible mentor to the movement for a number of years. One of the founders of Black Agenda Report, rest in power, Glenn Ford, whose mighty luminous pen we could never forget, and whose pen we carry with us in these trying moments. She is also the author of, I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. She's played a leadership role in Black Alliance for Peace and the United National Anti-War Coalition. So Margaret Kimberley, uh, executive editor of Black Agenda Report, is going to lead the first hour tonight of our class, drawing connections between the Black liberation struggle and the Palestinian liberation struggle. And in the second half of the class, we're going to do a type of anti-imperialist watch party. We're going to watch Tucker Carlson sit down with Vladimir Putin, and we're going to converse about it and tease out the dialectics of it and listen to different opinions on that interview, which occurred about 2 hours ago. So we'll catch the recording, but treat it as if it was live. So, Margaret, it's all yours. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Danny. Greetings, everyone. Thank you to Midwestern. Is it Midwest Marks or Midwestern? But at any rate, and is it really in the Midwest? I don't know. Um, but thank you, Danny, for that introduction, and thank you to Susan Gordon, who invited me to be here tonight. Um, as you know, I'm here to talk about Black solidarity with Palestine, but I also want to talk about Palestine more broadly, which is essential as we are now in the 5th month of U.S. Israel genocide and war crimes against the people of Gaza. And these terms, war crimes and genocides, it's clear to me that two things are clear. One, people need to know what they are, how they're defined, who defined them, and that we need to use them a lot more often. And this is not the first genocide. It's not the only example of war crimes committed in the world. And once you understand their meaning, and you will, I believe, be a lot more cognizant, and you won't be. I think people are afraid of these words. They think there's some sort of high bar that has to be met before they can be used, when the reality is that they're committed all too often. So war crimes are, what are war crimes? And all these definitions came into being after, especially after World War II, the war crimes of Hitler's Germany. And so it was very important to codify for people to ask themselves, well, what makes a war crime a war crime? So I'll start with this. This is the Fourth Geneva Conventions, Article 33, and this is easy to find. I just Googled it. I was like, well, what is the definition? I knew there are many definitions. There are many things that make up war crimes, but there was one that was of particular interest to me, and that is the concept of collective punishment. So this is Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Conventions: individual responsibility, collective penalties, pillage, and reprisals. And it reads as follows, quote, "No protected person may be punished for an offense he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or terrorism are prohibited. Pillage is prohibited. Reprisals against protected persons and their property are prohibited. Collective penalties. You may not be punished for an offense you have not committed." So when Prime Minister Netanyahu of the Zionist entity, or his ministers of his government, or elected officials here in the US, or pundits, or anyone says that Israel has the right to keep killing people in Gaza because of what Hamas did on October 7th, they are de facto admitting to committing war crimes. That's one of the means by which South Africa charged Israel with genocide at the International Court of Justice. They were being charged with the words of their own mouths. It wasn't very hard for South Africa to do it. All we needed was a country to be brave enough, because they were constantly admitting it. What's genocide? And this is the UN Convention on the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide. In quote, "In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group." And elements of the crime, I'll read a little. The crime of genocide may take place in the context of an armed conflict, international or non-international, but also in the context of a peaceful situation. And it goes a little further: physical acts, killing, bodily harm, mental harm, and as I already said. And it's on the basis of this definition, in 1951, the Civil Rights Congress presented the UN with charges of genocide. We charge genocide regarding the treatment of Black people in this country. And that's why I say the word should be used more often. So when you think about this definition, it's not just Israel and Gaza that is committing war crimes. And of course, they couldn't commit any without the US. That means the Vietnam War was genocidal. It means the invasion of Iraq was genocidal. It means US unilateral coercive measures, otherwise known as sanctions, are genocides, are war crimes. Collective punishment. So the US doesn't like a particular government and deprives its people of food and medicine. That's a war crime. So I just wanted to point out these things. And as we talk about solidarity, Black solidarity, anyone's solidarity with Palestine, and we have to broaden that solidarity. I think what makes the current situation somewhat unique is that we are seeing this in real time. Everyone's walking around with the cell phone, Israeli soldiers, Palestinian civilians. All you have to do is turn on a computer or your phone, and you get to see um, uh, war crimes. Bombing a hospital is a war crime. Depriving people of electricity, of water, of medicine, those are war crimes. That's an intent to harm a particular group, in this case, the Palestinian people. But what Israel is doing in Gaza, in what it's been doing in Palestine all these decades, is what the US did in Libya in 2011. It's what the US did in some of those other conflicts that I mentioned. So we have to make the connections and not just pick a villain du jour. And I'm not saying that the US and Israel are not villains, but they aren't the only ones. And this is not the first example of villainy. And as I read in the Genocide Convention, genocide doesn't have to take place in a war. It could take place at peacetime. That's why Black people can still say we charge genocide. That means mass incarceration is genocide. So many things that have been normalized are in fact genocidal. The intent to destroy, to cause harm to a particular group of people. So I thought it would be useful if I started out with that. So the idea of Black Palestinian solidarity is not something we should think of as being new. I want to thank my colleagues at Black Agenda Report, the editors of the Black Agenda Review. Last year, they presented the SNCC, that's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, fact sheet in the summer of 1967. SNCC, I'll just use the term SNCC as it was popularly known, published a fact sheet in their newsletter titled "The Palestinian Problem, Test Your Knowledge," which focused on the history of the formation of the Zionist state, the expulsion of Palestinians, the Nakba, the stealing of their land. So there were 32 questions. Did you know the following? And they said, quote, "Since we Afro-Americans are an integral part of the third world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, American Indians, and all persons of African descent, then it is indeed necessary for us to know and understand what our brothers are doing in their homelands," unquote. And this Palestinian problem, this newsletter was published soon after the 1967 war. And of course, there was immediate backlash. It sounds like today, doesn't it? People were angry. They were accused of being anti-Semitic. Donors stopped donating. Even some of SNCC's allies criticized them. But that's to be expected. But it was an effort to educate the public about the founding of the Zionist state, the fact that this was an imperialist construction, highlighting the war crimes and genocides committed against the Palestinian people. So there was a firestorm, but so what? And it's interesting that a lot of it, I think, stands the test of time. So test your knowledge. Let me read a few of these. Number one, did you know that Zionism is a worldwide nationalistic Jewish movement organized, planned, and created the State of Israel by sending Jewish immigrants from Europe into Palestine to take over land and homes belonging to Arabs. Well, that's exactly what it is. And two, that this operation, they received maximum help, support, and encouragement from Great Britain, the US, and other white Western colonial governments. Three, that organized Jewish Zionism dates back to 1897 when the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, or is it pronounced Baal? I'm not sure. The program adopted at the Congress was, quote, to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine secured by public law. That Britain took control of Palestine at the end of World War I and working hand in hand with European Zionists, such as Lord Rothschild, set forth the Balfour Declaration. Now, it's funny when you mention the Rothschilds, you know, everybody with the nutty ideas says the Rothschilds are behind something, but Britain's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote this letter to Lionel Rothschild, who was a leader of Britain's Jewish community, and promised a home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So this was not some wackadoodle theory. That is absolutely true. And so I think it's important to know this history of the history of Palestine, the history of the creation of the State of Israel, and the history of Black people, the Black radical tradition that gives us a charge of genocide for what the U.S. was doing domestically. That creates this SNCC newsletter that informs people of things that we all needed to know. You know, I think, you know, fast forwarding to the present, this has been a very challenging time these last few months, ever since October 7th, when, you know, the people have, according to the United Nations, have a right to self-defense. The Palestinian people have a right to self-defense. And that means they have a right to military action. And on October 7th, far from what we were told, that this was just a vicious attack, the Hamas is just a bunch of crazy Jew haters, we now know that many of the people, first we were told 1,400 people were killed, then it was 1,200 people killed, then it was 700 some odd people killed. And it turns out that many of them died by so-called friendly fire from Israelis. So we were told people were burned alive by Hamas. No, they were burned alive by shells from Israeli tanks targeting their homes. And we also know now about the Hannibal Directive, which is that people who are prisoners or at risk of becoming prisoners should be killed. That's Israeli doctrine. But we've been swimming against the tide. I'm assuming I'm preaching to the choir here, but we've been swimming against the tide of the U.S. state marching in lockstep with Israel, their friends in corporate media, backing them up, backing up every assertion that they make. President Biden going to a man with terrible judgment. I'm going to digress a little right here. Last year, a year ago today, well, those of us who were paying attention and had common sense knew that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline that connected Russia with Germany. But a year ago today, I'm reminded by Facebook, investigative reporter Seymour Hersh provided the receipts that Joe Biden and his team, Antony Blinken and Victoria Nuland and Jake Sullivan, they, in fact, were responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, a very reckless act, an act of war. It was even after this man, who was once respected as an investigative reporter, but he didn't get the memo that he wasn't supposed to keep investigating. And the story was covered up. And I point this out to talk about the judgment, or rather lack of judgment, that Joe Biden has. This man who was never considered a bright light of any kind. I mean, think about it. He was in the Senate for more than 30 years before Obama chose him as his running mate, and nobody ever said, oh, Joe Biden, one of the smartest people in the Senate. No, he was always a mediocrity, known for blurting out inappropriate comments, known for bragging about the crime bill of Bill Clinton's crime bill, which put so many Black people in jail, increased mass incarceration so much. So that's Joe Biden, a man not very bright, stuck in the past. He was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and the interviewer asked him, instead of asking, should the United States be involved in Ukraine and involved in Gaza, the interviewer said, well, can the United States handle both these things at the same time? As you know, implying that it's just fine, there's nothing to question. And Biden said, well, of course, we're not just the most powerful country in the world, we're the most powerful country in the history of the world. And it was a very a remark that was very telling. And so we have a president who takes that sort of judgment, that sort of worldview. Israel had just bombed a hospital, so he runs over to Israel and kisses Netanyahu's ring and says, I know your people didn't do it, who repeated lies. After October 7th, there was a wholesale, I call it atrocity porn, that Hamas had beheaded babies, and then there were stories of rape, and Biden more than once talked about beheaded babies, even after the Israelis walked that story back. And I also want to mention, I think it's important to mention the stories of rape, of sexual assault, and I believe that we can debunk those stories. The New York Times had an article, very long article, about one particular woman, and said who had died on October 7th, and they went on and on about how she had been raped. Then her family, one of her relatives, posted an Instagram that the reporter had misquoted the family, had misled the family, that the family never said anything about her being raped. They have not retracted the story. They haven't printed anything about it. But most of these stories have been called into question. So the United States, United Nations rather, said they would go and investigate these reports of sexual assaults. And Israel, the very strange thing, they told doctors not to meet with the UN investigators. Now, that was kind of odd if you're alleging mass rapes, but you tell doctors not to talk to the investigators. So this is what we've been facing. We've seen an amazing amount of pressure from Zionist individuals and organizations. A few people in Congress willing to say there should be a ceasefire, but most of them going along, except that the world, and I think there is for the most part a mass revulsion about Israel's these massacres of, is it now 30,000 people in Gaza, half of whom are children, entire families killed, population being starved. The people are all over the world have said no. And no one has spoken up more than Black people, and no one has been punished as severely. At Harvard, there's a lot of news, obviously, about the president being forced to step down, a Black woman who was, I maintain, not prepared well enough for this setup in a congressional hearing. And then was accused of being an anti-Semite. But before that, two Black students at Harvard who had merely signed a letter condemning the killing of civilians, requesting a ceasefire. They were doxxed. Their faces were plastered all over local media. They lost job offers, and the president did not come to their assistance, interestingly enough. I always remember that. But it was Black people who stood up. And it's not only do Black people stand up, but the Democratic Party seeks to use Black people every 4 years. It's a very sad sight, this quadrennial circus, as I call it. Joe Biden, before the South Carolina primary, went to Charleston, South Carolina, and very cynically used the Black church, Emmanuel AME, known as Mother Emmanuel AME Church, which was famous for terrible racist killing, white supremacists murdering the pastor and 8 other parishioners. And Biden used this church, and the people who allowed him to do it, shame on them eternally. They claimed it was a memorial for these victims, but it was a campaign stop. Biden used this church as a campaign stop. And most of the people in the church that day were not members of the congregation. They were Democratic Party operatives. But a few people did manage to get in, and they confronted the president with cries for a ceasefire, to their credit. And I think that was in the best tradition of Black protest for those folks to have done that. There were some who, mostly these, as we call them at Black Agenda Report, the Black misleaders, folks of that ilk. But I was very proud. It was an interracial group. It was a Palestinian woman, a Black woman. I think the guy, the man involved was white, but I felt like it was in the very best tradition. But there was one country, as I touched on, that stood up, and that was South Africa. It was obvious from the very beginning that Israel was acting with a genocidal intent. And at the end of December, South Africa filed a case at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the World Court, and charged Israel with genocide. And as I said before, the intent was easy to prove. And they went before the court and, for the most part, repeated the words of Israeli officials who said, no one is innocent in Gaza. Everyone's Hamas. Well, that's a war crime. That's collective punishment. That's intentionally causing harm. And by the way, there's no defense for genocide, except to deny that you've done these things, except you bragged about it, and there's all kinds of footage of it. The next day, Israel responded, and all they did was talk about October 7th, which is no defense. They requested that the ICJ throw out the case. The ICJ refused to do that and ruled that it was plausible that genocide had been committed. And it was very moving to me to see the legal team, when they got back home to South Africa after appearing in court, and they were greeted by cheering crowds like, ordinarily a sports team. It was wonderful to see a legal team being celebrated that way, and being celebrated for standing up. And since that time, numerous other countries around the world have joined them, even as shamefully the US and its allies said that the case was meritless and baseless. But a couple of weeks later, when the ICJ announced that they would make their ruling, coincidentally, the US claimed that the UN Relief Agency, that they were cutting funding from the UN Relief Agency because Israel claimed that some of their staff members belonged to Hamas and participated in October 7th. I don't believe any of it. And even if it's true, because having praised the agency, the UNRWA, as bringing life-saving help to Gaza, the US, by its own admission, was practicing collective punishment in withholding aid from the people, not just of Gaza, actually, but on the West Bank, in Lebanon, and in other places. as well. And that is an implication. Um, well, I'll put it this way: it shows you once again that genocide, that war crimes, are what the U.S. commits on a regular basis. But I also wanted to talk about the importance, and I know I've been talking and talking. I want to give people a chance to ask me questions, but I will give a shameless plug. Tomorrow is Friday. That's when we publish our Black Agenda Radio interviews, and I have two very interesting interviews. One with a Palestinian writer, Rawan Masri, who's in Ramallah, who happened to be in South Africa at the time the charges were filed. And she talked about the importance of this solidarity, that it's South Africa, which the people of South Africa who triumphed over apartheid, who were the ones to stand up and make this case. But she also had a warning about South Africa in the post-apartheid era, did not meet the needs of its people, left the land in the hands of the people who stole it. And she pointed out that that's an important lesson as Palestine moves forward, seeking liberation. The second interview is with a Canadian writer, Elle Jones, who got in touch with me on January 15th, Dr. King's birthday. She and another group, she was part of a delegation of Black Canadians who were going to testify before the Supreme Court of Canada about anti-Black racism. And just an hour before they were to speak, they were informed that they could not speak because of social media posts which made some clerks feel unsafe. Now, they weren't told what those were. Elle believes it's her posts about South Africa and the ICJ, but Canada, like the US, is criminalizing protest, suppressing and criminalizing protest. Someone was arrested in, I think she said Calgary, who said the words "from the river to the sea" and was arrested. The charges were dropped, but the lesson is there that the state can move in and crush any dissent, any protest. People were told they couldn't protest in certain places in Toronto because allegedly these were Jewish neighborhoods and therefore they were being anti-Semitic, except the neighborhoods weren't Jewish. And in any case, they're supposed to, in a democracy, have the right to protest anywhere they want. They weren't even going to discuss Palestine. They were going to talk about Canada's history, despite its reputation as being nicer than the US, about Canada's history of anti-Black racism. But that Black people are to be policed and are to be, in her words, acted upon and not the actors. And therefore, prominent people in Canada have vilified South Africa, saying they had no grounds to bring their case to the court. But at any rate, you should listen to Black Agenda Radio every week on blackagendareport.com. And so both of these people raised the issue of anti-Black racism and tied it to Palestinian solidarity. So I've been talking for like a half an hour. I did want to say all of these things, but I'm hoping that people have questions or comments for me. I would love to hear from you while I take a sip of water after talking all that time. Thank you.
Danny, do you want people to raise their hands or
Thanks
put
so much.
something in chat?
Thanks so much, Margaret. You want to, Margaret, you can just call on people. People can jump in. Whoever has questions, comments, clarifications.
Margaret, one thing I've been wondering about, the part of the definition of genocide, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, that seems to be the one part of the definition they generally say is not applicable, and I don't think they brought that up in the ICJ, but I'm wondering about transferring Palestinian kids to prison where they're treated to military so-called justice, not civil justice, and also the stealing of Ethiopian Jewish babies. For the second case, would it be that since it's a different group, not Palestinians, it wouldn't fall under the definition of genocide because you're talking about a second group?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Ethiopian Jews, and the first thing people say if you correctly say that Israel's an apartheid state, you point out, no, Ethiopians were welcome there. There are lots of Ethiopians in the country, except there were cases of Ethiopian women being sterilized without their consent, without their knowledge by the Israeli government. And preventing births within a group is a genocide. It's a war crime to kidnap children. Israel routinely, as you point out, kidnaps kids, uses children as human shields, brings them before courts, separates them from their parents for months or years at a time. And yes, as you point out, those are all part of the definition of genocide. So yes, those are very good points to make. Thank you, Susan.
Margaret, you can call on people or people can jump in.
Margaret, the survey that you mentioned, the survey on Palestine from 1967, is that survey available online somewhere?
Yes, it is. It is. I will, let me see if I can put it in the chat. I can give you the link to the Black Agenda Report story. Let me see. The SNCC newsletter. Come on, computer, don't be slow. Yeah, here we go. You know what? I will just give you the link to the Black Agenda Review article in the chat. And someone asked the question, I'm interested in knowing more about the group called SNCC. So were they the first to bring Palestinian liberation into the consciousness of the American left? SNCC, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they were not the first. Folks on the left were always in solidarity with Palestine. They were what's called a civil rights organization, very active in the liberation movement in the 60s. But they were among the first at that moment of a Black organization pointing out Israel's very problematic history, the fact that it was a colonial construct, the fact that it was an imperialist state, whose formation began actually in World War II, or as some call it, the First Imperialist War. So I hope that you take a look at this, their testing of our knowledge and learning more about SNCC. Did I see a hand? I thought I saw a hand raised.
Ruth?
I thought I saw a digital hand as well, but anyway.
I had my hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was wondering, Margaret, you touched on this a short while ago. I was wondering if you knew or could tell us a little bit more about the concessions that Nelson Mandela made.
Well, it's rather a sad story that actually, as a condition of his release, we know that Mandela was imprisoned for, I think it was 27 years, the ANC, the African National Congress, had been a very radical organization. They had pledged, for example, giving the land back to the African people that it had been stolen from by European, mostly Dutch, but other settlers, some British settlers as well. And in order to win his release and then to get money from the World Bank and the IMF, they gave up these pledges that had been made over many decades. And it's a reason many people see Mandela as, I guess you could putting the best light on it, a tragic figure, but for many people, they're very angry with him. They felt as though what could have been something revolutionary was betrayed. So you have this country, South Africa, has, gold, diamonds, every resource that we need in the world, but the workers there, it's still a capitalist country, and those industries are still run by US and British and French corporations. So the end of a political apartheid, yes, there's a majority rule government, but the government's controlled by capital. And Black people in South Africa remain very poor. White people have the political power, even though they're still in the minority. It's very funny to me that they're guaranteed a certain number of seats, and they're guaranteed that they won't be outvoted on key issues. But the revolution, it was not a revolutionary change in South Africa, and that's very sad.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ruth, you had something, right? Go ahead, Ruth.
Yes. Hello, I'm Ruth from Woolgoolga in Australia, and I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Gumbaynggirr people. I am standing on land that is Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. Sovereignty was never ceded. Okay, so I can't quite believe what's going on in my country, because we voted for a Labor government, and Labor had a policy of recognising the occupied territories. I mean, they used that language, and, recognising the dispossession of the Palestinian people. However, in this war, it's like they've gone to water. And I mean, I just can't believe what's going on. And I noticed this morning a backbencher Labor, Josh Wilson, broke ranks, and he has, in Parliament, he has condemned Israel's bombardment of Gaza as unconscionable and declared the besieged territory as being bombed into rubble. So that's caused a bit of a stir. But anyway, I'll cut to the chase. I feel like, in some ways, I feel powerless. I'm trying to do what I can on social media. I go to Gather for Gaza rallies. I've written to newspapers, to members of Parliament. They're not publishing my letters and not responding. Like, what can we do? I'm just interested from a United States perspective, because you've got your government's, even with respect, your government's even worse than ours, because I understand that the US actually sells bombs to Israel. So, like, what is the best way of trying to stop this war?
Well, I would say keep doing everything that you are doing. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I think there's something more. There's a movement now in the US, and I see a hand up and a question in the chat, and I will get to them next. It's called the Abandon Biden movement. And this is a campaign that came about in Muslim communities across the country, Arab American communities, who say not only will they not vote for Biden again, they will actively work to defeat him. And they are not swayed about arguments of you're just going to put Trump back in office or it's a lesser evil, or they are saying, and very principally, you can't kill our people and get our votes. And I love that. But they shouldn't be the only ones saying it. I believe that is the principled position for all of us. These so-called liberal, so-called democracies need to go. Now you're seeing these splits, and that's a good thing, but I think we need to make them real. So I don't vote for the Democratic Party, the allegedly left-wing party, the party that's supposed to be the lesser evil and better than the Republicans. I stopped voting for them a long time ago. So I was already on board. And I think this movement, the Abandon Biden campaign, is a lesson for Black people who feel trapped in this duopoly, of who's, in the US is, even our electoral politics are racist, with one major party being the white people's party, one being the Black people's party, and Black people feeling that the Democrats are the only game in town. That's all we can do is vote for them. I say no, and I think it is a wonderful thing that other people are not only saying no, but saying they will bring about their demise. So I believe these turncoat parties who pretend to be parties of workers or parties of the people or the lesser evil, that you teach them a lesson, that you show your own political strength, and that not only do you keep doing the things that you've mentioned, but that you bring them down. I think that's very important. And I saw a digital hand, Z Farhan, and then Cleo in the chat, and then DKL. So Z Farhan.
Hello, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. I just wanted to ask you just about your opinion in general regarding the ICJ ruling, specifically because it's clear that it has had no effect on the ongoing violence in Gaza. So I was just wondering, do you see this as more of a change in the general discourse going on that will eventually lead to concrete change in the future about like holding Western powers accountable? Is that kind of maybe your opinion, or what is your opinion?
Well, I think the ICJ has no enforcement power, and that's what we see. So I think it was very important that South Africa took Israel to court, that the court said genocide, the charge is quite plausible. But of course, Israel, being Israel, thumbs its nose even more, and that means killing more people. And they immediately went on a new killing spree. So it's a tool, as one of those folks I interviewed said. It's not the ICJ can't be the means. It's not the end. It's more like the means. It's the tool to get there. But I think they didn't, for example, they didn't use the word ceasefire. They did say Israel has to stop killing people. So they may not have used the word ceasefire, but I think what they said was very important. And that's why the US immediately took up Israel's lie that the relief agency is an agent of Hamas, to blunt what the ICJ. I think that actually is an indicator of how important the decision was. Now we'll see. The court said Israel had to come back in 30 days, had to report on how they were living up to what the court told them, to stop killing people. So what will they do next? They certainly aren't. That's not their plan. Ethnic cleansing is their plan. It isn't as though the people of Gaza are collateral damage from a larger geopolitical plan. Killing them is the plan. That is their plan, to depopulate Gaza, to drive the population out, and to open Gaza for settlement. And I think it's very clear that that's the case. And so I do believed, despite its shortcomings, that the ICJ ruling was important. Cleo, DKL, Sam Dixon, Cleo asks, why isn't there more focus on the genocide in the Congo? I imagine the US and Biden are involved in that one too. You are absolutely right. Congo is I think one of the most tragic stories in history. This nation that has every resource the world needs: gold, diamonds, coltan, cobalt, all the materials that we need to be in touch right now electronically come from Congo. The nascent democracy of Patrice Lumumba was destroyed within a year, and the U.S. put in a puppet government. What was that horrible man's name? Mobutu, for many decades. Every government is a puppet government. These resources are controlled by US and European and Chinese companies. They have this, I hate this term, artisanal mining. It makes it sound like, baking a cake or something. Men, women, little children take a bucket and a shovel and dig for coltan and get paid pennies a day while other people grow rich. These resource wars are stoked by the US, neighboring nations. Uganda and Rwanda regularly fund the M23, I believe, militia. In the early 2000s, more than 6 million people were killed in the Congo at US instigation. The last thing the US wants is for the Congo to have a government that works on behalf of its people. That is a genocide. It's one of many. And that's why I said we have to broaden this discussion of saying, yes, there's genocide in Gaza, but while also reminding the world that there are many different genocides, and the Congo is just one of them. So DKL, Sam Dixon, and Kenny T. DKL.
Hi, Margaret. This is Diana.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I just wanted to touch on something that you mentioned earlier. I got a very interesting text message from the Biden administration yesterday. I don't know if you've seen that. It's about 4-question survey. They sent it to you via text. The first question was, will you vote for Biden? I responded no. Then they asked me if I'm a liberal, how liberal am I? And then the third question was, are you aware that Obama said that if we don't vote for Biden, then Trump's going to get in? And so I just wrote in as my last name as ceasefire because I had to write something. So I don't know if you've seen that, but I think they're really feeling the heat.
Thank you. I have not seen that particular text, but I've seen these all of a sudden Biden's on Facebook, give me money and, I'm going to finish the job, and you can't let Trump be the president. Everything they're doing in Gaza is what Trump did. Trump cut off funding to the relief agency. Trump did everything Israel wanted. They hit the jackpot with him, and they're hitting it again with Biden. And I joke, it's a sick joke, that the winner in November is going to be Netanyahu, because whoever the president is going to be a Zionist. And I want to digress seemingly for a moment and talk about this horrible fraud, Robert Kennedy Jr., who began his campaign claiming he was against war and he was pro-peace. And then he says we have to have unconditional support of Israel, which necessitates war and killing. He is, of all the people running for president, I think he's actually the worst. He's the biggest fraud. I think he's the most dangerous of all of them. And I wish that other independent candidates, Cornel West, Jill Stein is running for the Green Party nomination, probably will get it again. And I wish they would take him on more directly. Thank you. Sam Dixon, and then Kenny T.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and your service to the anti-imperialist movement in general and Midwestern Marx in particular. I just had a quick question. Can you recommend some Black scholarship on the connection between Palestine and just the Black liberation movement? And I first became familiar with Black Agenda Report by watching a talk from Gerald Horne, who I believe does writing for the Black Agenda Report. But yeah, I was just curious on some recommendations for that scholarship. And thank you so much for your presentation. I learned so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would start with Gerald Horne, who has contributed to us. I've interviewed him, and when Glenn, may he rest in peace, when Glenn was alive, interviewed Dr. Gerald Horne, a prolific author on so many different subjects. He is someone you can always listen to and read. You should always take a look at Black Agenda Review, one of our regular features in Black Agenda Report. The editors of Black Agenda Review always present past scholarship, interviews on a wide variety of subjects. So I would make those two recommendations. And before I go to Kenny T, I want to bring up Black Alliance for Peace. Black Alliance for Peace has taken on while not the only role, a role in leading the international coalition to stop genocide in Gaza. I will put in the chat the link. The signatures, though, are for organizations, not for individuals. So please keep that in mind. More than 2,000 organizations have signed on so far, and that's part of our mission at Black Alliance for Peace in reviving the Black radical peace tradition. So be on the lookout for that. You can go to the website blackallianceforpeace.com, and we have a Palestine page with a list of recommended readings as well. Kenny T.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm on low bandwidth. Just three quick questions. Is there a place online where all the debunked lies that have been spread by all of our politicians that, it has been debunked and is like on a central repository somewhere that we can all go read it? That's my first question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and the second question is, I've been watching the sparring between the Dearborn, Michigan, the people of Dearborn, Michigan, and the White House, and other Democrats. They are saying that, it's about ditching Biden. And I think they need to figure out, or they probably already know this, that it is not just Biden, but the entire Democratic Party in lockstep with the Republican Party. So they're all involved. We saw that Israeli rally in DC with Schumer on stage with Jeffries. So it's not about just ditching Biden, it's about ditching the entire party and getting everyone over to the third party. How do we accomplish that? That seems to be the hard thing to do. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I had a senior moment. What's the first part of your question? If you could repeat it, please.
We've had Hillary Clinton and Pelosi and everyone else, including Biden, spreading lies. All these Israeli
yes, thank you.
lies.
Okay, and now remember, I got it. Thank you. So you have
debunking the lies. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. blackagendareport.com every week. Some of my other favorite sites, Electronic Intifada on this topic, but others as well, electronicintifada.net, consortiumnews.com, the Gray Zone. Who am I forgetting? If anybody wants to jump in with a recommendation, but all are good in, thank you, Mint Press News. Thanks so much for putting that in the chat, and some others. But there are, and for all its problems with Twitter and the fact that it's owned by a racist maniac, Twitter also is a great source of news, because I'm not going to say there's no censorship. Facebook is the worst for political news. Censorship on Facebook is the worst, but Twitter, the sheer volume of information and the people who are posting, you can learn a lot by being on Twitter. And I would follow everybody I just mentioned: Consortium News, Black Alliance for Peace, Black Agenda Report, Mint Press, electronicintifada.net. I think those are all good sources. Status Quo News. Yes, I interviewed Jordan Sheridan a couple of weeks ago. And I think DKL, is your hand still up from before, or is that a new question?
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I had to put my hand down myself. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to wind up. I've been talking for almost an hour. My voice is cracking.
Yeah, thanks so much, Margaret.
But thank you all. Thank you all so much for having me. And I had a blast being with you. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Margaret. Amazing. Amazing. You covered so much. And
Read Margaret's book, Prejudential.
book club.
I'm so bad at promoting myself. My book, Prejudential: Black America and the Presidents. You can get it from Steerforth Press, the publisher, from the place that starts with the letter A, from Barnes and Noble. You can get it from all those. And also, speaking of books, Glenn Ford finished the manuscript for this book, The Black Agenda, a few months before he passed away, published by Aura Books. It's a collection of Glenn's, some of his best columns. And thank you so much.
I think, Margaret, you already know the story, how I almost single-handedly tanked your book signing. The first book signing at People's Forum in New York. Margaret invited us, her New Jersey peeps, as she called it. So I was meeting the two people I was going to drive into New York with, someplace or other in New Jersey. I had never been before, had no idea how to get there. But I asked Glenn Ford, who lives in the next town, if I could pick him up, if he wanted to come with us. Glenn and I drove all over New Jersey. With a GPS, I could not figure out how to get to where I was supposed to meet these people. We finally managed to get there, and then I found out he was introducing you. So I would have been even more nervous that I didn't even get the person there in time who was introducing you. But I think we made it just in time. But my terrible sense of direction almost ruined your initial
It was
book
fine. I don't
signing.
remember you being late, so maybe you planned to be early and then you were there on time. But anyway, thank you, Susan.
Susan, you can be the Minister of Public Relations for Margaret's book. There's so many contacts out there. So it's been a noteworthy night in the news. I think Biden's addressing the nation right now. Democratic panic is on full display. So what I'm proposing is Carlos, myself, hopefully Eddie can come on, and the rest of us, we can just watch parts of this Biden address, and then whoever wants to can comment. And then the interview between Putin and Tucker Carlson is 2 hours, so that's a bit late, but people can join us for as long as they want. Our record's 2 a.m., but don't feel intimidated. You don't have to stay that long. So yeah, we'll watch a few pieces of the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview, tease out the rational kernels, see what it means about the class struggle, the anti-imperialist struggle, the struggle for a multipolar world. We may have a certain view of Russia, but mention Putin's name in Venezuela, see how many people come to their feet. Mention Russia and Syria, see how people respond. So these conversations are always very dialectical. And we certainly don't believe in any purity fetishes on the left here. So with that said, let's see what Biden is saying. Let me just find it on my Twitter, and we can I thought I had it queued up. Sorry about that. Do you have it, Carlos?
I do not.
Because I have Joe Biden, but so many things are coming up. All right,
Can't we
here.
watch the fake Joe Biden ad instead? Which I think they took that down. I can't find it anymore.
Carlos, can you remake me host? I kicked it back to you. You heard that, Carlos?
Yeah. Let me press that up.
Are you listening to Carlos, Danny?
Your host now, brother. The live continued, by the way. So I was afraid it would shut down if I made you host again.
By Hamas on the 7th, and I was 1970s.
How's the volume? Was that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Say a few things before I. Everybody. Let me say a few things before I take your questions. As you know, the special counsel released its findings today about their look into my handling of classified documents. I was pleased to see he reached a firm conclusion that no charges should be brought against me in this case. This was an exhaustive investigation going back more than 40 years, even into the 1970s when I was still a new United States Senator. The special counsel acknowledged I cooperated completely. I did not throw up any roadblocks. I sought no delays. In fact, I was so determined to give the special counsel what he needed, I went forward with a 5-hour in-person interview over 2 days on October the 8th and 9th of last year, even though Israel had just been attacked by Hamas on the 7th and I was very occupied. It was in the middle of handling an international crisis. I was especially pleased to see special counsel make clear the stark distinction and difference between this case and Mr. Trump's case. Special counsel wrote, and I quote, "Several material distinctions between Mr. Trump's case and Mr. Biden's are clear," continuing to quote, "Most notably, after given multiple chances to return classified documents to avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it. In contrast," he went on to say, "Mr. Biden turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his home, sat for a voluntary interview, and in other ways cooperated with the investigation," end of quote. I've seen the headlines since the report was released about my willful retention of documents. These assertions are not only misleading, they're just plain wrong. On page 215, if you had a chance, I know it's a thick document. On page 215, the report of the special counsel found the exact opposite. Here's what he wrote. "There is, in fact, a shortage of evidence that I willfully retained classified materials related to Afghanistan." On page 12, the special counsel also wrote for another documents, "The decision to decline criminal charges was straightforward. The evidence suggests that Mr. Biden did not willfully retain these documents. The evidence said I did not willfully retain these documents. In addition, I know there's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, wasn't any of their damn business. Let me tell you something. Some of you have commented, I wear since the day he died, every single day, the rosary he got from Our Lady of. Every Memorial Day, we hold a service remembering him, attended by friends and family and the people who loved him. I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away or if he passed away. Simple truth is I sat for a 5-hour interview over 2 days of events going back 40 years. At the same time I was managing an international crisis, their task was to make a decision about whether to move forward with charges in this case. That's their decision to make. That's the council's decision to make. That's his job. And they decided not to move forward. For any extraneous commentary, they don't know what they're talking about. It has no place in this report. The bottom line is the matter is now closed. I'm going to continue what I've always focused on, my job of being President of the United States of America. Now, thank you, and I'll take some questions.
President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that one of the reasons you were not charged is because, in his description, you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation. That's totally out.
How bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad, I let you speak. That's my.
Your memory has gotten worse, Mr.
No, look,
President.
my memory is not good. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
You thought I could pass any of the things I got passed. How'd that happen? You know, I guess I just forgot what was going on.
Mr. President,
Voters have concerns about your age. How are you going to assuage them? And do you fear that this report is only going to fuel further concern about your age?
Only by some of you.
Mr. President,
For criminal liability today, do you take responsibility for at least being careless with classified material?
I take responsibility for not having seen exactly what my staff was doing. It goes in and points out things that appeared in my garage, things that came out of my home, things that were moved not by me, but my staff.
Mr. President, for months when you were asked about your age, you would respond with the words, "Watch me." Many American people have been watching and they have expressed concerns about your age.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. That is not the judgment of the press.
They express concerns about your mental acuity. They say that you are too old. Mr. President, in December, you told me that you believe there are many other Democrats who could defeat Donald Trump. So why does it have to be you now? What is your answer to that question?
I'm the most qualified person in this country to be president of the United States and finish the job I started.
Do you believe that, Mr. President? Why do you think your name's a world leader?
I did not share classified information. I did not share it.
With your ghostwriter?
With my ghostwriter, I did not. Guarantee you did not. What well, no, he did not say that. He did not say that.
Mr. President.
Well, let me answer your question. The fact of the matter is, what I didn't want repeated, I didn't want him to know, and I didn't read it to him, was I had written a long memorandum to President Obama why we should not be in Afghanistan. And I was of this multiple pages. And so what I was referring to, I said classified. I should have said should be private because it was a contact between the president and the vice president as to what was going on. That's what it is referring to. It was not classified information in that document. That was not classified.
When you look back at this incident, is there anything you would do differently now? And do you think that a special prosecutor should have been appointed in the first place in both of these cases?
First of all, what I would have done is oversee the transfer of the material that was in my office, in my offices. I should have done that. If I go back, I didn't have the responsibility to that. That was my staff was supposed to do that, and they referenced that in the report. And my staff did not do it in the way that, for example, I didn't know how half the boxes got in my garage until I found out staff gathered them up, put them together and took them to the garage in my home. And all the stuff that was in my home was in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked. It was in my house. It wasn't out in Mar-a-Lago in a public place and none of it was high classified. Didn't have any of that red stuff on it. You know what I mean? Around the corners. None of that. And so I wish it
looks like it's just another 4 minutes.
Had paid more attention to how the documents were being moved and where. I thought they were being moved to the archives. I thought all was being moved. That's what I thought. Now, what was the last part of your question?
Whether a special counsel should have been appointed in this case and in the case of your rival former
I
president.
think a special counsel should have been appointed. And the reason I think a special counsel should have been appointed is because I did not want to be in a position that they looked at Trump and weren't going to look at me, just like they looked at the vice president. And the fact is they made a firm conclusion. I did not break the law, period. Thank you all very, very much.
He has ordered an idea.
Hostage negotiation. I'm sorry. I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. There are a lot of innocent people who are starving, a lot of innocent people who are in trouble and dying, and it's got to stop, number one. Number two, I was also in a position that I'm the guy that made the case that we have to do much more to increase the amount of material going in, including fuel, including other items. I've been on the phone with the Qataris, I've been on the phone with the Egyptians, I've been on the phone with the Saudis to get as much aid as we possibly can into Gaza. There are innocent people, innocent women and children who are also in badly in need of help. And so that's what we're pushing. And I'm pushing very hard now to deal with this hostage ceasefire because, as a, you know, I've been working tirelessly in this deal. How can I say this without revealing it? To lead to a sustained pause in the fighting, in the actions taking place in the Gaza Strip. And because I think if we can get the delay for that, the initial delay, I think that we would be able to extend that so that we could increase the prospect that this fighting in Gaza changes. There's also negotiations. You may recall in the very beginning, right before Hamas attacked, I was in contact with the Saudis and others to work out a deal where they would recognize Israel's right to exist, let them make them part of the Middle East, and recognize them fully in return for certain things that the United States would commit to do. And the commitment that we were proposing to do related to two items. I'm not going to go in detail, but one of them was to deal with the protection against their arch enemy to the northwest, northeast, I should say. The second one, by providing ammunition and material for them to defend themselves. Coincidentally, that's the time frame when this broke out. I have no proof what I'm about to say, but it's not unreasonable to suspect that the Hamas understood what was about to take place and wanted to break it up before it happened.
Where to begin? Well, the timing of this, you swear that these advisors, these political strategists decided to try to somehow curb the effect of the, you know, this is Vladimir Putin's debut with how many millions of Americans potentially?
It's already got well over 100 million views on Twitter. I don't know how many it has on Tucker's website. That's where I watched it in earlier, and I haven't checked how many it has on YouTube. So I think that this might be in part an effort to distract from Tucker being used, for whatever reason, as a force that allows millions of people who probably haven't heard Putin speak about his side of the affairs. But it's very interesting. Of course, you have the gaffes of Mexico and Sisi, and it's but it forces us to think, like, why is it that the U.S. empire, the most powerful empire on the planet, is so okay with having such a decrepit symbol on its head? It's sad to see, but the reality is that it really doesn't matter who's leading the country. It's just a symbol for the forces which are actually operative in the direction of the nation, which is finance capital, the ruling elite, the capitalist class, and the representatives of the people are anything but representatives of the actual American people. There's no real democratic accountability. These people all serve the elite, and if if a baby could do it, they would put a baby up there to do it. The interest that they serve, I think, always has to be put on the table. But what's interesting, I think, about the special counsel on Biden's case that was barely mentioned here, or was mentioned very shortly in a very dismissive manner, was the conclusions regarding his memory. I'm reading from a tweet screenshot that Glenn Greenwald shared. It says, in his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended. And then he quotes, if it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president? That's a quote from Biden. And forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began. Another quote from Biden in 2009, am I still vice president? He did not remember even within several years when his son Bo died. And his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Among other things, he mistakenly said he, quote, had a real difference of opinion with General Carl Eikenberry, when in fact Eikenberry was an ally whom Mr. Biden cited approvingly in his Thanksgiving memo to President Obama. It's interesting that when the memory thing comes up, the thing that he automatically goes to is the discussion around Bo, his son, because he can shift it to a plane of emotion. And I mean, who's not going to sympathize with a father mourning his that son? But the real concerning issues surrounding the literal president's memory issues and incapacities are just ignored through that process of deflecting and focusing in on the issue of his son instead of these other gaffes that he had. And the assessment of the actual counsel, which is that he's got serious memory issues and he can't be held accountable when he's in that sort of mental state. It says Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Based on our direct interactions and observations of him, he is someone for whom many jurors will want to identify reasonable doubt. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. So they're doubting that he's in the mental state to lead a jury to the conclusion that he meant to do any of these things. I mean, this is just completely absurd. It's a laughable state of affairs, but one that I think is representative of the decline of America on the world scene, the American empire.
Eddie, you want to check in, say what's up? But I think people want to get back to the Tucker Carlson stuff. So let's keep it, I think, relatively brief here and then go back to that and then stop it after a few minutes. Go ahead, Eddie.
What's up, everyone? I just got here, so thanks for having me. I'm excited to break this down. I watched like 30 minutes of it before practice, but that's it.
Good to see you, comrade. Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's just two quick things. It's interesting how that interview essentially plays out how many huge articles that made massive assertions would end the article saying, these reports have yet to be confirmed. to write paragraph after paragraph of atrocity propaganda and then end it with, these accounts have yet to be confirmed. That genuinely, in my opinion, should be kind of illegal type stuff. It's inciting. Anyways, that's a whole other thing. The second thing is his weaponization of the death of his son. I know it was touched upon briefly, but that's been a campaign staple for him for years. He's been hitting on that. And I mean, he hit on it before his son died. He would say, oh, my son served, this, that, and the other. And then when his son died, I'm not trying to make light of that, but that was extra political capital for him. Was he could now, and it's disgusting. I'm not going to cry over someone that went across seas to oppress poor people, but still, he weaponized the death of his son for further political capital, but yet he can't reconcile that with the deaths of the tens of thousands of children, of whom that number is only going to rise astronomically as we now enter in the phase of where diseases and lack of equipment gets to the Palestinian people, because in those genocides and slaughters, the mass physical killings only come to a proportion of the actual deaths, which come from lack of the resources and the diseases that set in and all these different types of things. Just because you can't slaughter doesn't mean you can't exterminate. And that's what they're doing. So thanks.
All right, let's get into the Tucker Carlson. And you heard how Biden slipped in the thing about Hamas as he walked out. That was real slick.
Started what's happening.
Danny, that's not the interview.
Again, one note before you watch. The beginning of the
says 2 hours right in.
Oh, okay. I'm confusing it with
he gives a little introduction. He gives a little intro in front of the Kremlin.
The following is an interview with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shot February 6, 2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most pressingly, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine. So our opinion would be to view it in that light as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is. Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable series.
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history or giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Let's look
By the way,
Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started.
It's pretty funny that he starts off by, give me 30 seconds to a minute so that I can give you this historical recap. And then he goes on for like 40 minutes.
So
an incredibly in-depth historical recap.
This was not what Tucker Carlson was going for.
I mean, just compare that with Biden, though. It's insane.
As a centralized statehood. And it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862, when the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign. In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country. In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's young son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev. He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod. The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988. This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape. Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne. But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons.
So do we roll the whole historical lesson? Or what does everyone want to do?
I think we should at least speed it up, put it at 1.5 or 1.25 if 1.5 is too fast for folks.
It sounds like. Go for it.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of the speech that Slava of the Revolution Report gave at their conference in Chicago. She basically gave this whole history and laid it out from a Marxist perspective, if anyone's interested. But yeah, I think we could skip ahead a little bit or fast forward.
Because would it make sense to go right to like minute 30 where he goes into the Ukraine stuff, or whatever you all think? Yeah. That was some intense history. That was humbling.
It sounded like he was just reading the audiobook of Lenin's Development of Capitalism out loud with how specific the history was.
Well, of course, it did come true. And you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point. And many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia, do you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are a market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of
Can I
knowing.
say something quick?
He understood everything, I assure you.
The waves of NATO expansion, and especially like the NATO dismantling of Yugoslavia and bombing of Serbia, I think is such an important piece of history that Americans don't understand. Because, like, I've heard Zizek or a lot of these, prominent left-wing intellectuals talk about the NATO destruction of Yugoslavia, and they talk about it like it was a good thing. Like it was cut and dry, we dropped bombs on them and that stopped the genocide. And that's the end of the story, which of course is not the story. Everyone should read To Kill a Nation, The Attack on Yugoslavia by Michael Parenti, which is a book that I picked up right when the Russian special military operation in Ukraine happened, because I wanted to learn more about NATO expansion. I wanted to learn more about this conflict. And it's hard to grasp the extent that Western finance capital went to infiltrate Yugoslavia, to dismantle their socialist economy. And then, they waged this horrific bombing campaign on Serbia. And, during that bombing campaign, ethnic conflict in Yugoslavia only increased, right? The U.S. claims that they stopped the genocide, which Milosevic was then never actually convicted of at The Hague. But there was obviously tons of ethnic conflict going on between these nationalist groups at the time, but that increased when the U.S. bombings began. So they didn't stop a genocide. They made everything worse, and they had been making everything worse for years by funneling arms and weapons to groups like the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA, who was previously a terrorist group before the U.S. took them off the list of terrorist groups so that they could start funding them. There was IMF and World Bank infiltration for years to destroy the economy. So there were all these lengths that the West went to dismantle Yugoslavia, which made life much worse for the people there, but also that expanded NATO closer to Russia's borders. And now, Kosovo, which has been carved out of Serbia, has more NATO troops stationed there than any other place on earth. So Putin's claim that these waves of NATO expansion were aggressive and imperialistic are extremely legitimate, especially when you take into account, like you said there, the Russian people have a strong historical attachment to the Serbian people and to the Ukrainian people. And now you have NATO and the West dismantling these countries and setting up puppet governments. It's incredibly threatening and provocative to Russia.
Well, and then you're a Putin propagandist for saying something like that. And that's where you run into the purity fetish problems, is people can't say someone has a legit point to make without, you know, kowtowing to them essentially.
The Putin payment has been delayed this month because of the Tucker interview. You know, but what there's a comment that Lasordo makes in his scholarship on Russia, which is that after 1917, Russia can be properly considered a country of the global South. And I think that is true from the standpoint of our analysis of Soviet history and the strong ties that developed with tricontinental Asia, Africa, the Americas, specifically South America. And it's also true in light of what ends up happening after the overthrow of the Soviet Union, the privatization, the horrific conditions that developed in Russia in the 90s. It's very similar to the approach that imperialism takes on other nations of the global South. It's just straight up looting and the destruction of people's lives, the destruction of any measures that have previously been obtained by socialism to uplift the standard of living of the people, of the general welfare of the people. And we all know what horrendous conditions that leads to in Russia in the 90s. But it's very interesting because they're forced to confront the fact that their road away from socialism is not a road towards bourgeois democracy as it exists in the US or in Europe. It's a road a lot similar to the countries that decide to take the capitalist road in the global South, which means a constant position of attacks and something resembling a lot closer the relationship of colonized to colonized power than one of like the relationship that the US has to like European countries that are benefactors of imperialism. Also, it's interesting how Tucker posed the question as one where what was implied is that the US is not afraid of China. And we have to remember that Tucker's form of like right-wing populism that says or tends to say the truth with regard to Russia, there's a hidden, interest in it, which we should be careful of, which is it's stupid for us to do this to Russia, to wage these proxy wars against Russia, because it just brings them closer to China. And our attention should really be on China, not on Russia. And I mean, objectively, we've seen the ties between China and Russia deepen after the beginning of the special military operations. But I think we'll see, if we haven't already, some of the limitations in Putin's worldview. There's a few times where Tucker's forced to reiterate the question, like, why do you think the West is doing this against you? And because there's not that Marxist analysis there, he can't really give an accurate response in the way that I think people coming from our Marxist or Marxist-Leninist worldview that have a grappling of the concept of imperialism and that can understand the capitalist mode of life comprehensively and explain it in a way that's much clearer. I kept on listening to Putin's response when I heard this earlier, and I'm like, you're not getting to the essence of why Russia has been necessary as an adversary, as a pariah for the US empire, the many faceted ways in which having Russia as an enemy is a benefit to US capitalist imperialism. He's not able to explain that because of, again, those limitations in worldview. You have to remember that Russia's playing an objectively progressive role in terms of world history, but framework of analysis is still not Marx's one. So there are some setbacks like these, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, you guys can watch for yourself and see if you think he does a really good job at explaining, but I felt like he fell short in some areas.
Which is a public relations loss as well, from the perspective of the Russians. All right, keep playing it.
Yeah.
Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, Do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was.
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
If he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay, fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive, I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your point of view?
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere. Why we received such a negative response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on. And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO. I will give you another example now concerning Ukraine. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote, even if they do not like something. Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret to you, say anything new. Nevertheless, after that, we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq. We were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus. But they continue to do it anyway. And political support, information support, financial support, even military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus. I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, it's impossible. Do you have proof? I said, yes. I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof. He looked at it, and you know what he said? I apologize, but that's what happened. I'll quote. He says, well, I'm gonna kick their ass. We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply. I said to the FSB director, write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President? He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply. We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, we have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it. Just ridiculous. Well, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. So you're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your government?
Of course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus. That's who they called the opposition. This is the second point. The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the US missile defense system was created. The beginning. We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States. Moreover, Afterwards invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean. I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team. I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that we believe, if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran. That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
Let me ask, what year was this?
I don't remember. It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr. It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about. I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together. The world will change. We'll probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world. He says yes, and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course. We need to think about it," I'm told. I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side. They said to me, "Yes, we have thought about it. We agree." I said, "Thank God, great, but with some exceptions."
So twice you've described US presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who are elected in your telling.
That's right. That's right. In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the details because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential conversation. But our proposal was declined. That's a fact. It was right then when I said, "Look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures. We will create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems." The answer was, "We're not doing this against you, and you do what you want," assuming that it is not against us, not against the United States. I said, "Okay. Very well." That's the way it went. And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day. But it wasn't us. We proposed to go the other way, and we were pushed back. Now, about NATO's expansion to the east. Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what? They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand. So there were 5 waves of expansion, the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on. And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. Now about how decisions are made there. Germany, France seem to be against it, as well as some other European countries. But then, as it turned out later, President Bush, and he's such a tough guy, a tough politician, as I was told later, he exerted pressure on us and we had to agree. It's ridiculous. It's like kindergarten. Where are the guarantees? What kindergarten is this? What kind of people are these? Who are they? You see, they were pressed, they agreed. And then they say, Ukraine won't be in the NATO, you know? I say, I don't know. I know you agreed in 2008. Why won't you agree in the future? Well, they pressed us then. I say, why won't they press you tomorrow? And you'll agree again. Well, it's nonsensical. Who's there to talk to? I just don't understand. We're ready to talk, but with whom? Where are the guarantees? None. So they started to develop the territory of Ukraine. Whatever is there, I have told you the background, how this territory developed, what kind of relations there were with Russia. Every second or third person there has always had some ties with Russia. And during the elections in already independent, sovereign Ukraine, which gained its independence as a result of the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, it says that Ukraine is a neutral state, and in 2008, suddenly the doors or gates to NATO were open to it. Oh, come on. This is not how we agreed. Now, all the presidents that have come to power in Ukraine, they relied on electorate with a good attitude to Russia in one way or the other. This is the southeast of Ukraine. This is a large number of people. And it was very difficult to dissuade this electorate, which had a positive attitude towards Russia. Viktor Yanukovych came to power, and how? The first time he won after President Kuchma, they organized a third round, which is not provided for in the constitution of Ukraine. This is a coup d'etat. Just imagine someone in the United States wouldn't like the outcome.
In 2014?
Before that. No, this was before that. After President Kuchma, Viktor Yanukovych won the elections. However, his opponents did not recognize that victory. The US supported the opposition, and the third round was scheduled. What is this? This is a coup. The US supported it, and the winner of the third round came to power. Imagine if in the US something was not to someone's liking, and the third round of election, which the US Constitution does not provide for, was organized. Nonetheless, it was done in Ukraine. Okay, Viktor Yushchenko, who was considered a pro-Western politician, came to power. Fine, we have built relations with him as well. He came to Moscow with visits. We visited Kiev. I visited too.
Danny, can you pause
in
it?
a formal setting. He's pro-Western.
I think we should try to pause it more and do more commentary, because I feel like we're just kind of stealing the interview at this point. I don't want to get hit with any copyright. We just got to make sure we're adding commentary and actually be in line with fair use laws. But either way, if people want a detailed, in-depth expose of what Putin's talking about right now, check out the movie Ukraine on Fire. It was an Oliver Stone movie that details the 2014 coup, and then the previous coup, which was called like the Orange Revolution or something. You have Euromaidan in 2014, and then there was like a color revolution effort before that that was led by the US. But that movie details it. It shows how much money the NED and these other NGOs funneled into Ukraine. It shows how they orchestrated these events, like a bunch of Ukrainian right-wing extremists firing on people with sniper rifles. In Maidan Square, you have dozens of trade unionists being burned alive in Odessa. All these horrific crimes that turn Maidan from a peaceful protest into a violent coup. And our buddies at the Revolution Report just did a video called The Color Revolution Doctrine, where they basically explain the US playbook for overthrowing governments, for fomenting these color revolutions. But yeah, there's overwhelming evidence. There was a leaked phone call of Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt planning out the new government in Ukraine, the post-coup government. And still, you'll have some people who deny the evidence of the 2014 coup, but what Putin's saying couldn't be more obvious. And that's another one of those like essential events that you have to know about in order to understand what's going on in Ukraine, that a lot of Americans just don't know about because our media pretended that it was a conspiracy theory, and called the coup a conspiracy theory, and anybody who talked about the coup a conspiracy theorist for the last 8 years or so. And I mean, that was the first time that our TikTok account got banned. after TikTok got taken over by NATO operatives and former State Department officials, was when we started talking about the coup. Because if you conceal that part of history, it really makes it hard to understand, I guess, why Russia launched their special military operation. That's a key piece of the puzzle.
Or it's like getting all fussed up about the Cuban Missile Crisis without acknowledging that there were missiles in Turkey being pointed at the Soviet Union, ready to be launched, or all the lies about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, how there were so many overtures from the Soviet Union to curb the fascist rise, and those were denied. But as soon as they make a non-aggression pact, which the imperialist countries had already signed with other fascist countries, then it's unacceptable. So it's like they lie about these different agreements about expansion, and then they commit to it. But as soon as a country defends itself against it, they're the enemy. So that's why it's so important to learn all this context for us, so we don't think these things come out of nowhere. Because I'm doing this project where I look through textbooks to kind of see how we were taught things generally, and not a single Cuban Missile Crisis section mentions anything about Turkey. Not one. So again, if that's all you know, then of course the Cubans and the Soviets are antagonistic or whatever. So just thought I'd share it.
Well, rest assured, the military-industrial complex is not a big fan of Tucker Carlson right now, nor have they been. This is certainly a monkey wrench in their everyday functioning, the smooth grind of their machinery, reminiscent perhaps of the WikiLeaks, all those documents and cables dropping where so many things were exposed for investigative journalists. So this is has kind of a tell-all quality to it. Tucker Carlson, he interviewed Russell Brand last week too. Some real gems in that one. But I think liberalism is on full display, all of its short-sightedness. And if you look at CNN and MSNBC, they won't even mention this interview. So they'll continue to isolate themselves. Who could forget all the Russiagate stuff? The amount of energy spent on that, distracting people. And that was at the height of the struggle against police terrorism. Michael Brown and so many of us were in the streets for Eric Garner. And the liberals, all they did was push this Russiagate stuff. I was thinking too, imagine the relationship between the translator and Putin. Imagine the level of confidence. Imagine how many prior battles they have to be so in sync. That translator, it's like when I roll with the Haitian revolutionary leaders, I better know the discourse, or how could I ever keep up? So when you train together in that sense, so the translator, it's also flowing from his own historical training. I mean, if you didn't know that's what's taught in Russia. He's dropping a Russian history lesson that to us is, brand new. Takes us back to War and Peace. Anyone else want to jump in?
Danny, I just want to say real quick what you said about the liberals pushing the Russiagate. It was the same thing here. I remember going to a protest after George Floyd, and no, it wasn't that. It was the Bernie campaign. It was an event for Bernie, and some guy had a sign that said, "Twinkle, twinkle, little czar, Putin's got you where you are." And it was a picture of Trump. And I'm like, what are you doing here, bro? We're like trying to get healthcare for people. And this guy's just pushing the Russiagate nonsense. But it's crazy how many people fell for that. It was quite the trick that they pulled on a lot of people.
Nancy Pelosi still saying it, that we care about Gaza not because of a human instinct, not because of solidarity, not because of internationalism, not because the Palestinian people have given everything to exist. Their dignity is humanity's dignity. They're the true measure of the lack of humanity and humanity. Oof. Anyone else want to jump
Yeah,
in?
I do. I want to say just, I think that the Green Party has recovered from this, but our presidential candidate in 2020, Howie Hawkins, was deeply in the middle of these things that we're just talking about, and it was extremely difficult, and extremely disappointing. And we're gonna as Greens, if Jill Stein is the candidate, it's all going to come out all over again. And people who are opposed to her, for the other side of what Howie's was talking about. So we can't really escape that kind of propaganda at all. We have to just be able to counter it, deal with it, address it, and say, I always loved thinking that, when I've been called a Putin's puppet, that yeah, I'd get up in the morning, I'd swing my legs out over the bed and go to the telephone, and there'd be a red button going, flashing, and I'd pick it up and I'd say, okay, Vlad, what are we doing today? It's just so, those charges are so ludicrous, but they're pervasive.
Go ahead, Julie.
Muted, Julie.
I think she froze.
Okay, can you?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So am I really ignorant about this history, or did he just drop some huge revelation when he was talking about proposing that the US, Europe, and Russia have a combined missile defense system? That's like huge. But maybe I didn't get the memo and everybody else has just known about that.
No, he's dropping gems. A lot of people from different political persuasions are like, this confirms so much of what we know about militarism and capitalism. And no one knows about Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was the original dismantlement of what they did to Libya, what they did to Syria in a much more covert way, a much more effective way, one could argue. But at the height of all these imperialist takeovers, it's very interesting to measure the different leftist tendencies. And for Yugoslavia, there was a legitimate anti-war movement. There was a big anti-war movement. Definitely not as big as Iraq in 2003. But for Libya, I'll never forget in Times Square, we had demonstrations with like 13 people, and people just mocked us, threw stuff at us, made fun of our chants. They would take selfies to say, like, look at these losers. So it's amazing when they beat the war drums. This population continues to succumb to very sophisticated propaganda. You know how many liberals will say tonight, I'll never watch, that's Tucker Carlson, that's their knee-jerk nausea, that bourgeois training for how many centuries. I don't think they could watch it. That would be an interesting test to reach out to your liberal friends, coworkers, family members and say, I would love for you to engage with this. It's gonna be a little difficult. You might want to fast forward through the history lesson, but I'd love to hear your objective thoughts. If they can fight through the layers and layers of, if you talk to a lot of these liberals about Palestine, very quickly you're going to end up hearing about Ukraine. As though somehow you can equate the two. When one side received 250 billion that's known taxpayer dollars from the United States. Though they won't even give those statistics very easily. And the liberals compute that somehow with Palestine, where every UN worker is a Israeli target. Every human being there is for the Israelis a legitimate target. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, just to highlight what you said, I thought I would go to your tweet of the Midwestern Marks Twitter account of the tweets from the clips. Weird how communists are suddenly into Trump and Tucker Carlson. It's almost as if they work for China and Russia, two authoritarian, capitalist countries. Do you want to guess what flags are in their bio? American flag and Ukraine flag. You know, there's a meme on there where it says if there's a Ukraine flag in the bio, it's like there's like a flick and the opinion's discarded. Someone replies, "Wow, so communist." Remember when you called Tucker anti-imperialist? LOL. So it's just people's reactions just to the clips. It's just I haven't looked at the Instagram post yet, but I just wanted to showcase. There's examples of that in real time of what you were just saying.
That's such a good example. That's why my pinned tweet on Twitter right now is abandon buzzwords, embrace substantive arguments, because like there seems to be just no ability to do that on X or on twitter.com. It's just like Danny said, it's these knee-jerk reactions that you almost can't blame people for, because it is just bourgeois liberal programming. Like that's how they've been taught to react, is, you know, not, well, let's think critically about, you know, what Putin's saying. Let's check out this interview with a guy who my country is sanctioning and trying to go to war with. It's just, you know, Tucker Carlson bad, Putin bad. That's as far as my thinking goes. And and you guys are communists and you're posting clips of this interview. You're dissecting this interview. Well, guess what? You're bad too, you chauvinist, pat sock, fascist, whatever's buzzwords. Yeah, it's a plague on the left for sure.
There's a comment on the Instagram post, and I don't understand how to interpret this, but it's a comment on the Instagram of the interview, and it says, "You have to be an idiot to make a fascist look good." I don't know who's that supposed to apply to who, but that's the kind of comment brain rot that you get with this kind of shit. Oh, goodness. Russian imperialism is still imperialism. Yeah, it's just all these comments over and over.
Tucker Carlson is one of the main China haters. All the drug overdoses, he blames China. And then for him to pretend like they don't fear China when they fearmonger against China every day. Roll another little clip. And somebody scream at me before I get us in trouble. I didn't know about all that.
And so be it. It's fine. Let people do their job. The situation should have...
Are there any highlights I should put on from Midwestern Marks? What's the best way to do it? Because it can get lengthy quick.
Yeah, what do you think? Do you want to play the clips that Carlos uploaded?
Yeah.
That's what he suggested. Because it's hard to pick out, like...
Can I make you co-host so you can call them up? I made you co-host so you can.
Okay, yeah, I'll try. I'm on my iPad, but I should still be able to. Yeah, I was getting lost in the interview. I was like spacing out, and I'm like, wait, we better do some commentary here before we get in trouble.
Yeah, then we won't get our checks from Russia for a copyright strike.
Exactly.
It's such a historic interview that it's like you're holding your breath while you're watching it, just taking it in.
For sure.
It's historic in multiple ways. I mean, the deep history, though, you have to have a certain attention span for that. A lot of people are going to be like, what the? I didn't sign up for this.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar. We had no such intention. It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%. Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this? What are you doing? You are cutting yourself off. All experts say this. Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US. You're killing it with your own hands.
I think that.
Wow.
Do you know what that reminds me of? And I see what Carlos is saying by Putin maybe not having the Marxist analysis there, but I mean, saying something that's completely true and, asking, did the American people even realize this is what's going on? But there's a chapter in Lenin's Imperialism called The Decay of Imperialism, where he talks about this irrational imperialist system essentially toppling in on itself. And I feel like that's what you're seeing here with these self-destructive actions that to a rational outside observer don't even make any sense, where the US is cutting themselves off from the world economically to try and, spite or destabilize or topple Russia and China. And in doing so, we're destroying our own economy. We're allowing conditions to deteriorate more and more and more for the working class here at home. And it's in nobody's benefit, but that's, just the modus operandi of the US empire, is to try and maintain unipolar hegemonic dominance at all costs. And now it's destroying us.
Has the ruling class been this divided in recent memory? This represents a major fissure in ruling class unity and rule. I mean, they constantly fight. How does Biden, do they keep moving forward with Biden? And liberals are so sheltered, they're often not even exposed in their silos to Biden's gaffes. So they have a lot of denial around it. I've heard liberals try to argue he's buoyant and he's vibrant and he's witty, and he didn't, I don't think he came across as, of course we can see through, he's propped up, but he was sharp enough tonight.
I was thinking that too when I was watching him, at least at the beginning of the interview. I was like, man, I haven't seen him this sharp since he dissed black leaders right after the election. If anybody remembers that YouTube clip, I think I'm honored to meet Margaret Kimberley in person. I think she wrote about that. And I saw something in my feed, and I am definitely not picking up mainstream stuff. So when Joy Reid comes across my feed, and then I watch the little clip, and she's reporting on some dissidents within the State Department who are protesting against Biden and demanding a ceasefire. And I'm thinking, the establishment is there. I mean, Joy Reid would not be doing this, and these State Department people would not be talking about this unless there was some rift within the establishment. And it just makes me think what I thought of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from the beginning, that they are just great scapegoats for this kind of stuff. It's so easy to let them off the hook or to hate them. Same with Trump. And this stuff is all going to happen anyway. This stuff was already planned. There's ways to make money off of it. And what was saying earlier about the insanity of the decision-making in this disaster, imperialist capitalism collapse, it's like, that makes perfect sense too. But I just thought that was weird to see Joy Reid, of all people, from MSNBC reporting on this. And I'm like, am I out of touch, or is this kind of a common thing? Because I was quite.
Hey, Gordon, it's good to have you back. You have been gone for a while.
Yeah, Gordon, really good to see you, brother.
Thursday nights are tough. You sent an email that I was already late, and I think I got an email halfway about, I don't know, it would have been
That's
like
amazing.
7 o'clock or something.
So glad.
And then I was like, what the hell, I'll log in.
Beautiful, beautiful. Anyone else? I'll roll another clip, start to wind down.
Yeah, I think we uploaded one more I can play to the Instagram there. We'll see. I haven't seen these yet. That last one was good. Let's see.
These
here.
are the wild.
Nope, that would be me.
It's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next. And maybe you trade one colonial power for another much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again. Through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
Mr. Tucker. That was good. That was so interesting. It's yeah, and I mean, one of my favorite books that I read in the last 5 years or so was Xi Jinping's Governance of China, where he lays out their general principles for trade policy, and it's just cooperation, mutual development, and complete non-interventionism. We won't mess in your politics. China won't export revolution. We'll just, trade with everyone so long as it's mutually beneficial. So it's like, why wouldn't countries want to trade with that versus the US, And then China's got this giant population, they've got this growing, manufacturing base and industrial base. They produce almost everything in the world. It's no wonder countries are turning towards China. And I think, ultimately that just shows the superiority of socialism as an economic system and as a social system. But, and the US is, rather than, adapting, like Russia's adapting and starting to trade with China, the imperialists are just shooting themselves in the foot and isolating themselves more and more and more. And I mean, if you look at the last spending bill that hasn't passed yet, but there's a bipartisan effort to get it passed, it's another $118 billion to foreign wars, 60 billion to Ukraine, 17 billion to Israel, 2.5 billion to the Red Sea. Just absurdity. So rather than doing the common sense thing and engaging in mutually beneficial trade relations, like more and more of the world is starting to do, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot and isolating ourselves more and more, and pumping more and more of our nation's wealth into endless war.
Eddie, isn't that book like 4 volumes that are hella big? You read all of those?
No, I have only read volume 1. You're right. So that's kind of a lie on my part to say I've read the
No, no, no. I didn't mean to call you out or anything. I was just like, damn, that's like, it's like the capital for China. And that's the other thing. It's like they shit on China and say things don't work there, yet countries are continuously flocking to them. Like, oh, their system works or sucks so bad, you're just constantly needing to go to it for trade and for loans and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. The lies don't make sense.
And then just, I see some people trickling out of the class. Just wanted to let you all know that we're here every Thursday evening. So follow the Institute and keep up to date with that, because we'd love to have all of you back every week. So please keep coming back. We're happy you're here.
For sure.
What y'all want to do? Call it a night? Keep going a little bit? We got another clip.
I think that's the last clip we uploaded. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to?
Any other highlights?
I don't want to I thought something was interesting in Tucker's interview questions and stuff, that he didn't really seem prepared, which surprised me, because like there's this history stuff you think you would prepare if you were interviewing a world leader. And especially like recent history about the Chechen War in 2014 and Yanukovych and the color revolutions. I remember this stuff being reported on back when things were different than they are now. The propaganda was different, but you still got a lot of this news through the mainstream. And I remember the Chechen War, there was the terrorists that took over that theater. Do you remember that in Moscow? And they took over the school at some point, and there was some controversy about the way the Russians handled it, but Putin was considered a hero by his people for having guided the country through that. So for Tucker to kind of, I don't know, I was kind of shocked that Tucker didn't know about the Chechen War, because like you would think that would be pretty important in terms of the making of Putin's distrust of the CIA and the US government.
Absolutely. He did kind of seem unprepared. I saw, maybe it was you said that earlier in the chat, and I think you were right. He needs to listen to some Scott Ritter. He recently went on Garland Nixon's show and talked about Chechnya for like an hour. It was really interesting. Yeah, actually the Chechen leader Kadyrov is a huge mixed martial arts fan. So he often like has mixed martial arts fighters to visit him, and every time a fighter visits him, there's like an implosion from the liberal media about them coddling dictators and stuff. So I always think that's interesting.
What was some of Ritter's major points on Danny Haifong's show? Did anyone catch that?
I'm in a grocery store, so it's kind of hard to talk about it in the aisles, but essentially Ritter was laying out, in regards to Ukraine, he's just laying out essentially what we had been presented with in the interview we were watching, just laying it out more from the UN analyst perspective that he comes from, and the military background and all that. And then when he talks about Palestine, he provides just more of that military logistical analysis that you might not get from, well, that you will not get from talking heads on the news. So someone more can elaborate if they've seen it.
I got to head out. Eddie, you want to keep it going, or you want to close out?
That's all right. We can wrap it up. Carlos said to make sure that you hit the end live button.
I'll do that first, right? So